Hello and welcome to Ethnic Media Services National Weekly News Briefing. I'm Sandy Close, Director of EMS. Today, our topic is the wildfire and hurricane season, which started officially on June 1st, and a groundbreaking national effort by nonprofit organizations in states that bear the brunt of these disasters to build resilience at the grassroots in the face of a broken disaster relief system. We're grateful to Jennifer Farmer, a veteran communications expert and principal at Spotlight PR LLC, for bringing this topic to our attention and introducing us to today's speakers. Ms. Farmer will be today's moderator. Before turning over the conference to Ms. Farmer, I ask all our speakers to speak slowly so our interpreters can simultaneously interpret what you are saying in Spanish, Mandarin, and not Korean this time. And I ask reporters to enter questions for our speakers in the chat box, which we will take up after each presentation as time allows. EMS will send bios of the speakers with their contact information so reporters can do follow-up contact on their own, plus a video of the conference to all attendees following the briefing. Now, I'm pleased to turn the conference over to our moderator, Jennifer Farmer. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Sandy, for convening this space. You know, June 1st launched the beginning of wildfire and hurricane season. And as our guests across the country brace for an extended period of potentially deadly wildfire season and hurricane season, we need to say that this season is fueled by climate change and past inaction. We are very aware that communities hardest hit by the combination of climate pollution, the pandemic, hurricanes, and wildfires are demanding solutions that allow us to build long-term climate resilient infrastructure and also thriving economies. My first guest today is Ashley K. Shelton, and she is the founder and president and CEO of the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. Unfortunately, she has lived through numerous hurricanes and has provided aid on the front line following those. I would love for Ashley to speak with us about the disaster economy and about what folks in Louisiana are doing to prepare for this hurricane season. Ashley?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. And again, just somebody put a thumbs up if I need to turn my video off so there's good sound. But I run the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, and we are a local civic engagement table. But one of the things that we do in our civic engagement work is that we know that I can't ask you to vote if I'm not also supporting you in times of great need and disaster. And last year we had the combined disasters of the pandemic and Hurricane Ida being the largest of storms, but one of many. And for us, it's really important to, to make sure that that community's okay. And so from a mutual aid perspective, one of the things that we're building right now, and we've become really good at, and I'm excited, over the arc of, recovery work in the state of Louisiana, there's now mutual.
Ashley, a little slower for the interpreters.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's happened to all of us. We get very intensely involved in what we're saying, but if you go too fast, the interpreters can't keep up.
No worries. I was just, no worries. So we are working to prepare for being able to provide direct cash assistance to communities. We were able to get about $200,000 on the ground within that first week. And this is so critical because people don't understand that, these hurricanes always happen around payday. Folks are taking, critical, resources that they would typically use to pay bills and do the things that they need to do. And those dollars are diverted to hotels, expensive, food where it is available. And then also too left without, internet or the grid for quite some time, especially in the case of Ida. And I think that, for us, it's like, how do we actually get resources? Because also FEMA doesn't show up until about 2 weeks after the storm. And so what that does is creates this gap where folks are desperate, they're reeling and hurting, and, and that the disaster economy and capitalism in Louisiana has gotten so, it has become such an industry that, we are now, we did a lot of work this legislative session to pass legislation around insurance companies and making sure that we're holding them accountable to their to their clients, because we saw a lot of that last year after Ida, where insurance companies weren't paying out. Lots of provisions that weren't clear in their policies, whether like it didn't cover wind or it had, this cap for, for natural disasters. And so again, making sure that folks understand what's happening. And so we are preparing, we're doing a couple of different workshops across the state to talk about what is available in community. And so for Power Coalition, it's about, one, how do we do mutual aid in a way that is effective and actually gets money on the ground to those most in need? And then the other piece is, and how do we also hold government accountable in this process? And so forcing FEMA to stop giving us pretend deadlines. Like we had to submit forms, like a week and a half after the storm. Well, if the grid is down, there's no electricity and no internet, how is anybody supposed to submit a form within that timeline? And so working with FEMA and the governor's office to make sure that the deadlines made sense for communities, and that also that the resources that are being provided to folks are clear, and that people don't feel like they're being kind of ignored and played with by government. And so we have been trying to drive as much of those federal resources to the ground, create as much transparency. It is unfortunate that it doesn't feel like those dollars are there, are tangible or can be felt. And it is that disaster economy that sucks up so much of the resources, and leaves the everyday family person home behind in that process. And so again, building out stronger mutual aid networks, doing some pieces around what are your rights as a insured person, all of the things that folks need to have ready. Also doing some work with our nonprofits to also have them prepare as well.
Thank you so much. So Ashley, we have a few questions, and I just want to remind folks, we will take questions after each speaker. So if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. So Ashley, can you talk a little bit about the importance of mutual aid? I know in a lot of times after a disaster, people think that FEMA is the solution, but can you talk a little bit about the role that mutual aid has played in communities of color?
Absolutely. The one thing that actually works in the aftermath of disaster is community coming together to help each other. And it's one of those things where I often talk about, like community has figured it out, right? Like that mutual aid, like really pushing, resources to the ground. Like the infrastructure, I can say, like I said, over 10 years, it's so exciting to see how many folks are actually working and connected to folks in community and really being able to work together to move those resources. And so what we've been trying to do is have some of those same conversations at both the federal level and the state level. I've talked about the idea of tax credits, this idea that, just like we did with the child tax credit. I mean, why can't we, in the midst of a disaster, give folks, $500 for the first 3 months after disaster is declared and they live within the declared disaster area? Also too, thinking about, like from a mutual aid perspective, one of the things that we often find is, food becomes like an unbelievable commodity, because it's hard to find, food becomes hard to find when the grid is down. Food goes up when the grid is, I'll slow down. The food is, the food is hard to find, and people also find it hard to navigate, the city. And so for us in this moment, one of the things that's really important. And I think is also true is that we know mutual aid works, and we know that it is a very thoughtful and, and a process that is not, fraught with fraud, which is what the federal government and state government likes to say about their processes, is that they're trying to protect against fraud. But the reality is that, the fraud to me is that we're not pushing federal dollars down to people that have been devastated by these storms. The fraud to me is that we are putting people through all of these things at the time, at the worst moments of their lives. Like, it doesn't make sense. And so, for me, it's also too this idea about, well, how does the federal government begin to trust people that they will receive resources, and that when they receive those resources, that they of course are going to rebuild their homes. They're of course are going to put those dollars where they need to be. And so whether it's a tax credit or just like we did with PPP loans, right? Like, we trusted businesses with a little paperwork and little questions. And so why can't we allow that trust to folks that have been just devastated by these storms? And so again, we know mutual aid works. We know that the fraud is minimal. And so this idea that we can't trust people with resources is not fair. And I think, and what is really true is we have not been able to trust the government, and we're dealing with clawbacks and other, other things that are happening to people, lots of contractor fraud and other things. And so you're having to pay back money that you put out to a contractor that you can't get back. And so it's all of these things where government just seems to be failing communities.
Thank you so much. There's a question: how do people submit required documentation when their documents may have been destroyed in the disaster?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think you have a lot of folks, depending on the damage, right? If it's water, there's some things that can be salvaged. But this document process is really difficult. And then what's nice is that, you can get your mortgage company to send you those documents. You can get your insurance company to send you those documents. But you got to remember, at scale, you've got thousands of people making those same calls to those institutions to be able to, regain some of the documentation that they need. And so it is slow, and it causes the process to be extended and even longer. And so I would say that, they're able to get some of those documents from, from the folks that they need to get them from. But it is much different when, again, they just moved legislation last year to change the airship issue. And so now at least there are three different ways or several different ways that you can show ownership of your property. And those documents become really critical and oftentimes, can be damaged. And so again, some of that training and some of that preparation, we're doing a whole peel and prep. We've got a crawfish boil. We're going to be talking to community. And at that, we're talking about the kinds of boxes and different ways to protect their documents. Because at this point, we've been through so many storms that, folks are getting a little bit more savvy. Lots of organizations provide, waterproof, boxes to be able to hold some of those documents. And so we're kind of working on solutions from the ground, but it is a huge problem. And especially when, you don't have electricity for 2 weeks and, and the grid is down.
Thank you so much, Ashley. What I'd like to do is to hold questions for Ashley and move on to our next guest. So our next guest is Daisy, Badola Sotelo. And Daisy, I hope that I've pronounce your name correctly. Daisy is the organizing director with PCUN. And just so you all know, PCUN supports Latinx families in Oregon, from farm workers to young people. And the goal is really to help the community have stronger political power to collectively improve their well-being and also to increase prosperity for all. Daisy, thank you so much for being with us all the way from Oregon. Can you talk a little bit about the concerns that you may have as we head into wildfire season and hurricane season, and also, the impact on farm workers?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Daisy Bedoya Sotelo, pronounced she, her, say, yeah. And as Jennifer shared, I am the organizing director here at PCUN. And it's been really challenging for us, as 2 years ago was the first wildfire that we actually had experienced. And, during the pandemic as well, right? Just like Ashley was sharing, there's like an added layer of just a lot of things going on, right? And what we actually saw was there was a lot of information coming out in English, and that's one of our main concerns as we're headed, into this season again, because there's not enough information out there for preparedness, or the steps that we should take to, even go to FEMA, right? All of the other things that Ashley was also mentioning. And that still is one of our main concerns. And we had to, step in and make sure that we were helping the community and do a rapid response that year that it happened. We also had mutual aid, and we had to step in because the state was not ready, right, for a lot of these wildfires that are happening, as well as their community members that are not ready. And so a lot of it, the concern comes, of course, from the Spanish resources that weren't available. We know that, our folks can sign up to emergency alerts, but even then, when you're signed up, they're not getting it in the language that they are needing it. And not just Spanish languages, but also indigenous languages. Here in Oregon, we have a lot of population from different countries, of course, but also indigenous languages that are a lot of the times not taken into consideration. And we're only talking about Spanish as a whole, right? But then there's a lot of other dialects that are also spoken. And it's been a huge concern. And as far as for farm workers, they were working and they still work while there's like a toxicity level that's really high from the smoke, right? And so that's such a big concern for our farm workers, as they are the ones that are providing the food at our tables, and they weren't being protected, of course. And we actually, hopefully some of y'all already know, but we just were able to work with OSHA and passed smoke and heat rules for our farm workers that are taking effect this year. So we're very excited to be able to share that with our community members. And that's some of the work that we are going to be doing alongside doing presentations about how to prepare for wildfires, of course, and where to look for those resources so that our community members are more prepared, right? What to have with them, what documents they should have, how to prepare an emergency backpack, right? How to do all the little things that we think are little, but we're really not prepared to do. And so we want to make sure that we're doing a lot of that preparedness work with our community members. And, we do outreach really wherever we find our community members, and our base is farm workers. And so we go out to the labor camps, we go out to the farms, we're going out to all of the places where we know our community members are at, to make sure that they are being informed and that they are being prepared. And at the same time, we do have a rapid response component to it, because we were, responding 2 years ago when this happened, and we are definitely way more prepared and ready than we were 2 years ago when the first wildfire hit us. And it was really devastating. A lot of our community members lost their homes. And just right after that too, we had a winter storm. So there was a lot that was happening, but those are some of the things that, we're working on. And also some of the challenges, just not having access to the right things, right? Not only in language, but, what happens when we're sending an emergency text message, but the person doesn't have a smartphone, right? Or what happens when we're asking them to sign up for something and they don't even have internet, right? Or all of the other accessibility issues that come up with that as well.
Daisy, thank you so much for sharing. We do have a couple questions for you. I do want to note that all of our speakers, they're in different parts of the United States. They've been doing this work for a very long time. This is not their first wildfire and hurricane season. What is unique about this year is that they are talking in a more formal way together, and they're under the umbrella of organizing resilience. But to focus on organizing resilience versus the specific organizations that they are representing would be a mistake, because they have been doing this work on their own in community for a long time. So I just wanted to share that for framing. So Daisy, what's the forecast for this season, given that many parts of the West have experienced a drought or are living through a drought?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to say at the moment because we're living through this climate change as well, right? I mean, here in Oregon, we or really late with our summer, if you will, and it's in all the changes are happening really fast, so it's really hard to say. But last year we experienced an extremely unfortunate event, and we lost unfortunately a farm worker, and it was very sad and to see that there weren't enough protections for our farm workers, right? And that's why we decided to continue that advocacy with OSHA and come up with all of these rules that are being implemented soon. But the truth is that last year we experienced a heat wave, and it was also the first time in I think 20 years that we had that amount of temperature, of high temperature. And so, as we are like getting ready for the unexpected, because right now the sun hasn't really come out. We've had some hot days, but it's really hard to say what it looks like. But definitely I would say we're getting prepared for probably another heat wave, right, as we already saw it last year, wildfires as well, and then really anything else that might come up. Unfortunately, we have to be ready as an organization, as a state, and of course as our community members as well. And it's sometimes unpredictable to even say, we might have one or two or three. And the difference between Oregon and California too is that, we experienced some of the first ones just like 2 years ago. And, we're not at the level that California is at the moment. So it would be a mistake for me to say, this is really what we're looking at, but definitely rather getting prepared for another, wildfire season, and of course another heat wave. And it's very unfortunate that we're here, but it's the reality also of many of our communities that we're facing at the moment.
Daisy, thank you so much. I want to ask you one more question, and then I'll hold the other questions until we get through. If farm workers are undocumented, do they qualify for relief? Like if they are directly impacted, can they still receive support from FEMA if they're undocumented?
Yeah, so that has been extremely challenging, and it's really challenging when it comes to agencies, right? Because even with the pandemic, we actually stepped up and were able to secure funding for our undocumented individuals, because as you all know, they did not qualify for stimulus checks. And so it was a state initiative that happened with 3 organizations that are sister organizations from us. And a lot of the work really has been, even we had to set up an emergency fund here at the organization because it was just extremely hard. And the reality is that folks are actually scared to go to these agencies because they don't know what the repercussions are going to be, right? So it's a very sad thing because they're not able to look at these agencies. And even when the wildfires were happening 2 years ago, there was a emergency set up. And folks weren't going because there were a lot of rumors around the immigration was there, or the fear of deportation, right? So folks are not really getting close to any of those resources because there's still that fear, and it's very unfortunate. And so we've been able to help through other ways, with the state and then or other organizations through mutual aid. But the reality is that folks are not really looking at FEMA, right, and saying, hey, we need this money, because there's just so much paperwork that goes into it, and there's a lot of fear at the moment that we're still having to work with as well, to be able to work with all the other agencies. But the reality is there's a mistrust, and it's just not also accessible to them.
Daisy, thank you so much. I want to go to our next guest. And our next guest is Chrishell Palais. She's the executive director of the Home Coalition in Houston. And Chrishell, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. So Chrishell, you and I have had conversations around the PTSD that can come from natural disasters that are exacerbated by the climate crisis. Before I heard you talk about this, I had never experienced it. Can you speak with our audience about just what it's like to survive a storm and then to know that you're still in the eye of the storm? So can you talk about that and anything else that you want our audience to know?
Sure. So, so I'm in Houston, Texas, and I'm the executive director of the Home Coalition. So we've been working, and we were actually created in the midst of Hurricane Harvey. And so we're a coalition of about 19 organizations that are working at the intersection of housing, flood resiliency, environmental justice issues, labor rights. It's all undergirded by community organizing. And so we do a lot of advocacy work that's really focused on disaster recovery. And we've been doing this work. Many of us have been in this sector long before Hurricane Harvey, as far back as, in some cases, some folks, Tropical Storm Allison, Katrina, Ike, and then Harvey. So clearly, we are no stranger when it comes to tropical activity. And although Harvey happened almost 5 years ago, unfortunately, there are so many people that are still that are still waiting for assistance and for their homes to be repaired, and especially low-income communities of color that are continuing to live in leaky roofs and homes with rotted wood, moldy ceilings, and walls. And so, if that were not enough, we also experienced a winter storm last winter in 2021, Winter Storm Uri, and it brought unprecedented freezing conditions to Texas, and our power grid failed millions. And this is the energy capital of the world, and we were left in freezing conditions and darkness for days, and in some areas actually for weeks. And then after the temperatures actually increased and the plumbing pipes warmed up, another disaster struck because there were burst plumbing pipes and water damage to homes and no running water. So as we, coming into our now in another hurricane season with tropic activity actually looming in the Gulf right now, our community is really suffering from PTSD. And, we're worrying about yet another power grid failure. We're worried about, continued exacerbation of issues that already existed. And even when it goes back to the power grid, we already have been warned because of increased temperatures of looming, rolling blackouts at this point in time. And a couple of weeks ago, the state actually sent out messages that everyone should keep their thermostats around 78 degrees. So Texans are really worried. Folks living along the Gulf Coast are really worried and concerned, not just about the power grid, but also about tropic activity and being struck yet again, and especially for those communities that still are waiting for assistance. We've been at the forefront and trying to make sure that their flood mitigation equity that's ongoing. We've been working with the city of Houston, with the county, and advocating for so many resources for our community members. But we are definitely a community that's in waiting and hoping, but definitely suffering from PTSD at this point.
Thank you, Chrishell. So I do want to ask, and this comes from Julia on the call, when can we or the government consider investing in disaster-proof homes, i.e. earth block homes, especially in locations where disasters, continually hit?
So I'll jump in there, and I'm not sure if any of our other colleagues will want to jump in there as well.
We're going to start with you. We're taking questions after each speaker, so
I'm sorry.
Free to answer that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. So disaster-proof homes in these different models, that's nothing new. Actually, in Texas, there was a model that was a grow home. That's what it was initially called, where there was a core concept that you could expand. And so this is something that I know that we have, when I worked with another organization, Texas Housers, we actually advocated for legislative change to adopt that as a model. But we fell short of being able to for it to actually come into fruition. But there are several. I feel like there are several of those type of models that are out there, but we haven't had the political will to really push that and to make that a priority. Then I think the next part of that is who gets those homes first. How are they rolled out? in what communities. I mean, I know that we know the communities that are most vulnerable that could potentially really, really benefit from those types of models. So the products are out there. There are various concepts about how to implement them, but what I've seen is that we've not had the political will to make it a priority and to really push that instead of the traditional FEMA trailer.
Thank you so much. Chrishell, I have another question for you. When you talk about some families still having plumbing damage or, you know, long-term damage from the storm, what I wonder is it safe to assume that that these are communities that were underinvested in to begin with? Is that a safe assumption?
Absolutely. And again, these are homes, you know, we often refer to Uri as like Hurricane Harvey that came from above, whereas, you know, with Hurricane Harvey, it flooded and then the water rose in homes. And so, yes, these are homes that are continue in communities that have not been served. And then another thing that we saw even after Uri, when there was the burst pipes, but what happened is, you know, these communities members, they would not have water. And then they actually couldn't get any assistance in getting their plumbing fixed. And those that were able to cobble enough money together to start getting the work done, they typically were outbid by other community members or other folks within the city that had more money to be able to, you know, offer to contractors. So they ended up being at the end of the list all over again and having to wait longer and longer and longer. And then going without water. And then, you know, one another thing we saw is that as they continue to pull the plumbing fixtures together and the piping together, they think it's fixed and then turn the water on, and yet another hole would be, they find another burst pipe. So it was just a very, very long process. I know people now that are still, you know, not complete with their work. I'm sure they have, most people, of course, everyone has running water now, but there's so much water damage that still is in place as we enter yet another hurricane season.
Thank you for joining us. I'm going to ask you to stay with us. I'm going to move on to our next and final guest, and then we'll answer any questions that you all may have. So my next and certainly the next, but he's not, my next and final guest, I'll just say it like that, is Mackenzie Marcelin, and he's the Climate Justice Lead for Florida Rising. Mackenzie, I would love if you can talk to us about housing affordability and how the climate crisis impacts housing affordability, particularly in Florida. And the reason that I think this is so important is much like what Chrishell was saying, I had never considered that the climate crisis reduces the pool of affordable housing, or that when homes are rebuilt, maybe they're not rebuilt for everyone. So I would love for you to talk about what you're seeing in Florida and what your concerns are as we go through this wildfire and hurricane season.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And yes, as she said, I'm the Climate Justice Manager for Florida Rising. Florida Rising, we're a political organization that focuses on building political power for Black and Brown communities, but not only that, but mobilize and empower our communities at the local level. And yeah, this hurricane season is particularly unique because we're coming, coming or currently existing in a pandemic. Folk are still, recovering or feeling the weight of that financially. And also, like Jennifer said, we're in the midst of a housing crisis. The housing market and the costs have skyrocketed for Floridians. And we know that, entering this hurricane seasons, it's a grave concern because a lot of folks are experiencing housing insecurities, not knowing where they're going to live next because, their rent is, multiplied by 300, 400,000, of dollars. And so, like I said, it's, raising rent prices is forcing people into, displacement. They're moving to areas and living situations that are less resilient. more in disarray, and aren't as able to withstand these disasters in the previous locations. But also, yeah, it's just a really bad time for folks, and we're looking to step in, and not just leave low wealth communities in a place where they don't feel supported, and they're not they're not prepared for this upcoming season. And so what we've been doing is making sure that folks one, just are as prepared as they can be in the places that they are at, right? So we're passing out materials and having events to prepare folks for this upcoming hurricane season. And it's particularly unique here is that we're facing a tropical storm right now. We got warning just before the June 1st date that there's something happening. It's raining outside right now. It's like crazy. And so these things are happening now, and they're happening at a larger frequency, and we need to make sure that folks are prepared, like I said. And so we've been running this Justice on Every Block campaign, and what we've been doing in relation to that housing crisis and connecting with disaster releases. We've been issuing campaigns at the local level, making sure that to push for landlord registries and landlord accountability boards, within the state, and in places like St. Pete and Pinellas County, in St. Petersburg and Pinellas County. We're demanding elected leaders establish a landlord registry to hold landlords accountable to local safety ordinances, and implement housing anti-discrimination ordinances to protect returning citizens, to make sure that folks are justly are living in a standard living that is safe, and that they're not living these slumlords are living, you're treating their situation, their place of living, sorry, I'm lost my train of thought, but yeah, like I said, we're working on anti-discrimination ordinances, and making sure that the local safety ordinances are up to date. I don't know if how familiar y'all folks are, but Surfside happened last year, where a building collapsed, and these are the examples of folks not or safety ordinances not being up to standard. A hurricane pops through, it'll really put folks in folks in buildings in situation, put buildings in situations where they're not able to withstand, and that leaves that causes the housing market to be in disarray. And so we're fighting for like I said, we're talking about the safety ordinances and the anti-discrimination ordinances, but we're also pushing for 90-day eviction notices for pregnant women and tenants with children. And ultimately, we want to make sure that we fight for a safe, affordable homes, rent control, making sure that that the development that does occur is not displacing folks, especially in the crises that we experienced during the hurricane season. And ultimately, we believe that housing is a right? And so, yeah, we're really focusing on making sure that folks are justly recovering, and have a place and have a secure place to be in shelter, and also, have security coming back. Coming back, and that they aren't being left out in the street during hurricane season. So yeah, thank you.
It's hard for me, Mackenzie, to wrap my head around, in the middle of a crisis, people being worried about having a place to return. It's hard for me to wrap my head around how a disaster could be used to evict someone. Can you say more about I think you said it was a 90-day ban for pregnant women. Can you say more about that work that you all are doing?
Yeah, it's in our we're trying to pass a tenant bill of rights throughout, like in where we're working locally, and these are just to protect tenants and making sure that they have just as much rights as these developers do. And also we really want to push that the idea that, like we said, like housing is a right. Folks need housing, especially during this erratic hurricane season. Again, that we are experiencing. It's 2 days into this, and we're getting heavy storms, heavy rains, flooding, and just think about the folks that need housing, right? And our families and people with children and pregnant women. Those are the folks that hopefully that we all, but these are the folks that, especially in our political climate, we want to make sure that these folks are protected. And so that's something that's included in our package of the tenant bill of rights. We actually had a tenant bill of rights passed here in Miami-Dade. I'm not sure if it included that 90-day, but we wanted to make sure that folks aren't thrown off guard, right? To the when rising costs and to evictions, right? To evictions. And so that's something that we're trying to push for. We push for in Pinellas County, and making sure that at least this sector of vulnerable communities, especially Black, Black and brown women are more likely to be the ones that are facing evicted, and folks with children. So, we want to make sure that they're protected and are able to justly, like I said, recover.
Thank you so much for that. So I would love to invite all of our speakers back, and I'm going to ask a few questions, and whoever wants to respond, you're welcome to. So first question is, what role are environmental justice groups playing in the efforts to build resistance and to strengthen disaster relief by the state and federal government? Are you all, receiving any support from environmental justice groups?
So I can speak to that somewhat. We definitely are, and I guess because where Houston is located, it's disaster recovery on another front. There was so many flares that went off during Hurricane Harvey. We know that some of the monitoring equipment actually came down at many of the refineries and plants before Hurricane Harvey in an effort to protect the plants. And so we know that there was an overwhelming amount of pollution that was emitted into the atmosphere. And so we've been working closely with many of our environmental justice partners to really get down, deeper into that, and really try to force or push, advocate more so for the city and the county to increase some of the measures, increase some of the requirements. And then also there's some advocacy going on regarding with the EPA as well. I'm not as versed when it comes to that, but we are definitely looking at environmental justice as one of the intersections of how do we recover equitably, especially because many of those communities where the refineries actually exist are frontline communities, very low income communities of color, and many of them were there first before the refineries even came. Yet, they're dealing with the immediate consequence of the bad actors. So that's what's kind of going on when it comes to the Houston-Harris County area regarding environmental justice and disaster recovery.
Thank you so much. I find it ironic that the people least responsible for the climate crisis are the people who bear the greatest toll. Black and brown people, indigenous communities, poor communities are least responsible, but suffer all these devastating effects. Back to the question, Ashley or Daisy or Mackenzie, anyone else want to weigh in on this question of what role are environmental justice groups, outside of the work that you're doing, playing in supporting your push for more assistance from the state and federal government?
This is Ashley. I think it's, I agree with Chrishell around that. Like the intersections are where the magic happens in terms of really being able to respond to communities in real time and to be really thoughtful in that response. And so we do a lot of work with our environmental justice and climate change groups. And in fact, Ida, really hit the river parishes hard. And so for, Sharon, like there are a lot of folks that know the work of Rise St. James, and Sharon, who is the leader of that organization and has, fought valiantly and been beating down this multi-billion-dollar corporation, like she has been pushing them back, but she lost everything. Like her home, she lives in a FEMA trailer while she tries to figure out how to fix her home. And so we have been trying to make sure that we're supporting them both organizationally, but then also to making sure that they can navigate these systems, and then also backing up their work so that, in these moments when we are distracted by disaster, the messaging and the work doesn't get lost, or the refineries don't find it as an opportunity, to sneak things through. And I think the last thing I would say too is that, like, of course, when a disaster hits, there are leaks, there are spills, like the air quality is decreased. Those things are not monitored in the midst of a hurricane. And so what we know is that it is having a huge impact on those communities, and whether it is at the intersection of reproductive justice and women losing children, losing babies before childbirth, or mothers dying in childbirth. We know that there are all these different ways in which, when these things happen, that, that there are really negative outcomes for those fence line communities. And so we've been also moving legislation to try to, force actual, enforcement of emission testing and some of these other things, because the laws exist, but, the Department of Environmental Quality here in Louisiana, like they say they don't have the capacity, and that leaves our communities basically breathing in these toxins and having, many detrimental impacts, in addition to having to try to rebuild their homes. And that it's not lost on community that any one of those refineries could have provided, more than enough resources to help those communities rebuild, but they don't want them to rebuild. And, they will hold festivals and, and have music, but not actually support the community in rebuilding.
I love that. Mackenzie, Daisy, anything to add before we move on to the next question?
I would just add that, we are also working with our with other organizations, definitely, that focus on environmental justice. And, some of our partners right now also are universities that are offering and doing a lot of research as well. And so it's something that it's really beautiful to see when it comes to like smoke, right? Like, how do we continue to protect our farm workers as well? And so those universities, some of them have also been great partners. And definitely we know that we were more successful when we work collectively with everyone. And just like, all the panelists mentioned too, it comes down to looking at the intersections where we can all find. And at the end of the day, we're all living in this earth, right? And we're all taking the changes that are happening with climate change, of course. And it's affecting us in very different ways. But at the end of the day, it's affecting all of us, right? So just wanted to mention that too.
Thank you so much. This is for you, Mackenzie, how responsive has the DeSantis administration been to the need for disaster relief that really works?
Yeah, no, I'd say his attention is elsewhere. You know what I mean? I think instead of, this past legislative session, instead of investing and making sure, in our infrastructure and making sure folks are prepared for this upcoming hurricane season. I think he was really, prioritized, his agenda and his base, and not really, paid attention. I think he issued an emergency session to write rules, and I'm not as proficient on speaking about the insurance properties, but essentially it would put folks in homeowners in positions where they their insurance their home insurance would skyrocket, right? And you can see that he's looking out for insurance companies but not the people, and that he's prioritizing profit over people. So yeah.
Thank you. Another question, and this is for you, Mackenzie, and for all of our guests, but the disaster education materials, are those being consistently translated into Spanish?
Yes, we definitely have. We last year we passed out our materials throughout the state and the counties that we're in. We shared it with different partners in English, Creole, and Haitian Creole, and in Spanish as well. And so we wanted to, and I believe there's also some, I think, Mandarin as well. For certain communities, and so we wanted to make sure that everyone has access to this information, because it's important, right? This is something that everyone experiences within Florida. We have a variety of people that speak different language. Majority of them, Creole and Spanish speaking, and so we wanted to make sure that all communities could interpret and understand and be ready for this hurricane season. So yes.
Chrishell, Daisy, Ashley.
Yeah, so I feel like in the Houston, Harris County area, it's kind of a mixed bag. When you talk about, I guess, the city and the county, I think most of theirs is definitely available in English and Spanish. In some cases, Vietnamese, I think, and unfortunately, I feel like one of the organizations as part of the Home Coalition is OCA Greater Houston. And so I know when that community often will raise, and we'll raise that we need to have more translation and more language justice, and that's when they're more responsive. But what's something that we're doing for the members of the Home Coalition, several of our organizations, whenever they're having any types of meetings, everyone has a translation set so that people can speak in the language which they're most comfortable. And we're hoping to model that for government to take notice. But most of our organizations definitely do communicate for sure in English and Spanish. And really, really pushing that more so for our leadership, city and county leadership to follow suit.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And the same in Louisiana. I mean, I think that it's Power Coalition and our partners, right? Like Bela, that works with the Vietnamese community in New Orleans. We work together to make sure everything gets translated. But I mean, to Chrishell's point, government needs to also do those same things, right? Like they need to create opportunities for translation. They need to create greater opportunities for folks to be able to engage with interpreters and make it accessible. And so I think that, we do that work. We make sure that we're modeling that behavior because it's important to our communities. And so absolutely, we translate everything into Spanish and Vietnamese in Louisiana. And then again, if there are some other things that need to happen, or there is, a small, portion of the community that, Creole, Cajun, French, we're able to do that as well.
Thank you so much.
I would just add that, for us as an organization, a lot of our work, whether it's elections, whether it's outreach or, any sort of work, we always have a bicultural, bilingual program. And, we are definitely wanting to also push not only our organization, but also government agencies to start looking at Indigenous languages, because there's such a high need. And a lot of the times, those are also the communities that are at the front lines, right? And they're being forgotten. And so that's something that we're definitely pushing, not only our organization and other organizations that we work with, but also our cities or counties and our state as well. And yeah, but all of our staff is translated. And then we were making sure that, we're also advocating for other languages and ASL as well.
What's next for you all? Like what's next? What's going to happen? What are like some of your immediate priorities, and what about long term?
I'll jump in. I think, some of our immediate priorities are putting infrastructure in place. So again, being able to really drive dollars to the ground in the aftermath of a disaster very quickly. We've been working to, we've looked at a couple of different systems, organizing resilience, put together a system that we used last year that was very successful at, using PayPal to move resources, because what also happens during these disasters is that PayPal and other, Zelle and other services like that, they decline so many of the cash requests, because they don't understand what's going on. And so the one time that these systems are supposed to work best is the one time that they actually don't work, because they don't understand. I mean, I don't know why they don't understand that like a disaster has happened and people are sending people money, right? And so we are working on that particular piece. Also too, we've been working with FEMA and their equity officers around the fact that our Native communities were purposefully drawn outside of the areas that can receive FEMA dollars. And so, so fixing these wrongs and the things and ways in which we've discriminated against communities of color, especially Indigenous communities, that's some work that we're also doing. And then also working with our churches and other trusted community leaders to hold FEMA accountable. And so for FEMA to send us things in real time for, it was just announced that Louisiana has $2.25 billion for Hurricanes Laura, Ida, and Delta. And of these resources, I just, that's a huge number. It could be a game changer for the state of Louisiana and our housing stock and housing insecurity. And so also a big part of our work is making sure that those dollars actually get driven to the ground and that we hold government accountable, because at this point, there's been so many storms and so much degradation of property that resources really need to be put on the ground so that people can truly rebuild and can actually sustain the next disaster, which is not where we are in this moment. And so that's, at the heart of some of the things that we're doing in preparation, but also doing that long-term work. I'm excited that, there's some conversations at the federal level to think about how do we actually get disaster CDBG dollars which is disaster community development block grant dollars to actually get to the ground. And so I know Chrishell was able to, and Andronika from Louisiana were able to testify in this committee hearing with Congressman Al Green. And so there are movements at the federal level to figure some of this out and to address some of the issues of the Stafford Act, which limit the ways in which FEMA can work to support communities after disasters, because the state just now notices that they're also charging anyone that got a trailer from the state, because FEMA, for whatever reason, couldn't do it fast enough. And it was a huge need because people were staying in tents on their properties. So now the state is saying that they're going to get charged if they need to continue to live in the trailer that the state provided. And so we've been doing a lot of work on the ground to help people make that decision about how to transition from the FEMA trailer, or to think about what is it going to really take to evaluate and get their homes rebuilt, and then where is their community support to provide some of that rebuilding, and then where are the professionals that we can engage to really be able to move into communities to help rebuild.
Thank you so much. Daisy, Mackenzie, Chrishell, any final words that you want to share on, what's next, or any parting words?
I guess I'll kind of jump in. It's that this continues to be ongoing issues. There, in many of the things that are going on may not be in the daily headlines, but locally it really matters. Just like right now in the Houston Harris County area, the state of Texas did not allocate CDBG MIT funds, which are federal funds to specifically address flooding mitigation. They did not award it initially to Houston or Harris County or any of the other smaller cities that were predominantly communities of color. So that's extremely problematic. And I believe, I have to go back and make sure, but I believe HUD just made an announcement or actually told the state that they need to go back and take a look at that. So these are things that are continuing to be ongoing, although, it may not be big news to the nation. Like it's so affects like federal policy making, federal rulemaking, federal decisions definitely play out very differently locally. Though it may not be garnering all the attention, it's really key to look and find out what's going on locally.
Yeah, and I'll say on the same note, just continuing, we're going to be continuing to, making sure that folks are prepared in the communities that we're in. They or not that they're prepared, but back them up and support, because there's already, continuous network of people that are focused on preparedness and disaster resilience that are on the ground, that are in the communities or in the neighborhoods. And we just want to tap into that and see where we can help and support. It exists, and we just want to strengthen it even more than it already is. It's really.
Thank you. Daisy?
Yeah, I think for us, it's definitely a lot newer here in the state, right? So just continuing to and empower, really, because that's part of our mission, right? As PECUN, to empower community members to be able to uplift their voices as well, and then advocate for themselves at the legislature. So that's something that we'll continue to definitely do, and making sure that they have the resources that they need to be prepared, and then also answer, in case of a rapid response or an emergency, be able to answer and support them as well and be there for them. And yes, I think that's short term, but also long term. And long term, definitely continue to advocate for more rules, right? The rules that we have to continue to educate our community members and what that means, but also continue to be involved in the implementation of them, because we all know that we have to be involved in all of those things so that actually they're followed and that they are actually protected, right? So I think that those are some of the things that we see coming, and just continuing to work alongside our community members and uplifting those voices and those folks that need to be at the front lines as well.
Thank you so much, Daisy. Thank you to Ashley and to Mackenzie and Chrishell. Thank you also to all the journalists who got on. I want to let you know that you've heard from people in Oregon, Louisiana, Florida, and Texas, but we also have partners in Puerto Rico and California, in different parts of the country. So this is an issue that we know is not going away, and they've all outlined critical aspects of this season, and also the devastating impact of the climate crisis on communities of color. If you want to follow up with any of them, I'll just ask our guests if you can once again put your name and your email in the chat feature, just so that it shows up closer towards the end of this segment. Sandy, thank you so much, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, and thank you to all our speakers for introducing this very important topic to our media. I think there is going to be a lot of interest in following this story, and the theme that what we're looking for is grassroots resilience, both for the immediate season, but in order to try to fill the void left by a broken disaster relief system. That's what I'm taking away from this very important segment. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, speakers. The conference is now closed.